On a sticky Tuesday afternoon in late summer, the kind where the air feels thick enough to chew, a rest stop off Interstate 77 in West Virginia sat nearly empty. The sun beat down on cracked pavement and faded picnic tables, and the only sounds were the hum of distant traffic and the occasional buzz of a cicada in the trees. Most travelers blew through this stretch without stopping. Too remote, too quiet, but for one young girl, it was the only place she'd been allowed to stretch her legs in hours. She sat on a weathered wooden bench near the edge of the lot, her back straight but her shoulders curled inward like she was trying to disappear. 16 years old with dark eyes that darted toward the ground more than they met anyone's gaze. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big despite the heat. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Fingers laced so hard her knuckles had gone pale. She didn't fidget, didn't check her phone, didn't hum or sigh or do any of the small restless things teenagers usually do when they're bored. She just sat, still, watchful, waiting. Beside her stood a man who looked like he belonged in a different scene altogether. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, dressed in neat khakis and a polo shirt, he leaned against a silver sedan with a dent on the rear fender. He kept glancing at his phone, then at the road, then back at the girl, never for long but often enough to make it clear he was keeping tabs. To a casual observer, they might have passed for relatives. Maybe an uncle picking up his niece from summer camp or a family friend giving her a ride home after a school trip. But something about the way she held herself, the way her breath hitched every time he moved, told a different story. A few yards away, a man named Derek stepped out of his rig. He'd been driving since before dawn, hauling auto parts from Detroit to Charlotte, and his lower back was screaming for a break. He stretched, rolled his neck, and walked toward the vending machines with the slow, deliberate gait of someone used to long hours and little sleep. At 52, Derek had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps before trading combat boots for a commercial driver's license. He wasn't looking for trouble. He just needed coffee and 5 minutes of stillness. But as he passed the picnic area, something made him pause. It wasn't the man's presence. It wasn't even the girl's silence, though that was unusual. It was the quality of that silence. It wasn't the quiet of someone lost in thought or scrolling through music. It was the quiet of someone holding their breath, waiting for the next command. Derek had seen that kind of stillness before, not on highways, but in war zones, in interrogation rooms, in the eyes of people who'd learned that speaking up could cost them everything. He kept walking, bought a lukewarm coffee from the machine, and leaned against a concrete pillar near the restrooms. From there he had a clear view without seeming to stare. The man checked his watch, then said something low to the girl. She nodded once, quickly, without looking up. When he turned to toss his empty water bottle into a nearby bin, she finally moved, just a little. She reached for the soda cans sitting on the table in front of her. There were 5, 3 lined up in a row, then 2 stacked vertically beside them. Derek's breath caught. He knew that pattern. Not from memory, but from training. Years ago, during a survival course, an instructor had shown them how to signal for help without saying a word, using rocks, sticks, even bottle caps. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS in Morse code. But in everyday life, people adapted. 3 objects in a line, then 2 stacked. That was a simplified version. Something taught in recent public safety campaigns, especially for kids and teens who might find themselves in dangerous situations with no way to call for help. His mind raced. Was it a coincidence? Maybe she was just organizing trash. But then she glanced toward the parking lot just for a split second, and her eyes landed on him. Not with curiosity, not with fear exactly, but with something sharper, recognition. Like she'd been hoping someone would notice. Derek didn't move right away. Rushing in could make things worse. If this was what he thought it was, the man might bolt, or worse, take the girl somewhere more isolated. He needed to act, but carefully. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check a message, and walked toward the old payphone near the edge of the lot. Most people didn't even know these still worked, but truckers did. He lifted the receiver, dropped in a quarter from his pocket, and dialed 911. "State police, please," he said, voice calm. "I'm at the rest stop on I-77, mile marker 112. There's a teenage girl here with a man who doesn't seem related to her. She just made an SOS signal with soda cans. I think she's in trouble." He gave the dispatcher the car's description. The silver sedan, the dent, the license plate he'd memorized in one glance, and described the girl's clothes. Her posture, the way she never looked directly at the man. The dispatcher stayed on the line, voice steady, telling him help was 8 minutes out. "Stay visible," she said. "Don't engage unless it's safe. But don't leave." Derek hung up and took a slow breath. 8 minutes felt like forever when every second counted. He couldn't just stand there, so he did the only thing that made sense. He walked back toward them, coffee in hand, face relaxed like he hadn't a care in the world. "Mind if I sit for a sec?" he asked, nodding at the empty space on the bench. "My truck's acting up, overheating again. Gotta wait for it to cool down." The man stiffened. His friendly mask slipped just enough to show the tension underneath. "We're not staying long," he said, a little too quickly. "No worries," Derek said, smiling like it was nothing. "Just needed a stretch. Long haul today." He sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the girl's hands tremble slightly. She didn't look at him, but her breathing had changed, shallower, faster. He kept his voice light, casual, talking about the heat, the road conditions up north, anything to sound harmless. Inside, his mind was sharp, focused, every sense tuned to the slightest shift in the man's behavior. The man checked his phone again, then stood abruptly. "Time to go," he said to the girl, his tone leaving no room for argument. She started to rise, but Derek spoke again, easy, unhurried. "Hey, actually, I just talked to a trooper a few minutes ago. Said there's a breakdown up near Beckley. Might want to check your route." It was a lie, but it worked. The man froze. His eyes flicked to the highway, then back to Derek, suspicion hardening his face. That's when the first siren cut through the afternoon air, distant at first, then growing louder, closer. Derek didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just sat there sipping his bad coffee, watching as the man's confidence cracked like thin ice. And in that moment, the girl let out a breath she'd been holding for a very long time. The siren didn't wail. It pulsed low and steady like a heartbeat pushing through the heat-hazed air. The man standing near the silver sedan went rigid. His eyes darted toward the highway entrance, then back to the girl, then to Derek, as if trying to calculate how much time he had before everything fell apart. He swallowed hard, fingers tightening around his phone like it might somehow save him. Derek stayed seated, calm on the outside, though his mind was moving fast. He knew better than to make sudden moves. In situations like this, panic could make things worse, especially for the girl. So he kept his posture relaxed, took another slow sip of coffee, and said almost casually, "Guess they're checking on that breakdown after all." The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned sharply to the girl. "Get in the car," he said, voice low but edged with urgency. She hesitated just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Her eyes flickered toward Derek again, not with fear this time, but with something like hope. Then she stood slow and careful, like someone stepping off a ledge. Derek watched her every move. She didn't run, didn't cry out. She just walked toward the passenger side of the sedan, head down, arms loose at her sides. But as she passed the picnic table, she let her hand brush against the soda cans, knocking one over just slightly so the SOS pattern was broken. A small act, but deliberate, like she was saying, "I saw you. I know you saw me." Derek's chest tightened. He wanted to stand up, to say something to stop this before it went any further, but he held back. The sirens were closer now. Blue lights flashed at the edge of the lot, painting the trees in quick rhythmic bursts. 2 state troopers stepped out of their cruiser, calm but alert, hands resting near their belts but not drawing anything. They approached slowly, giving space, giving time. "Afternoon," one of them said, voice even and professional. "Mind if we take a look at your registration and license?" The man's face went pale. "What's this about?" he asked, trying to sound annoyed rather than scared. "We're just passing through." "Routine check," the trooper replied, not blinking. "Your vehicle matches a description we received a few minutes ago." "Mind stepping away from the car, please?" The man glanced at the girl, who had stopped halfway to the door. She stood frozen, caught between obedience and the sudden possibility of escape. One of the troopers noticed and walked over to her gently. "Hey," he said, crouching slightly so he wasn't towering over her. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, I don't know him." Those 4 words hit like a stone dropped in still water. The man's shoulders slumped. The troopers moved fast then, not roughly but with purpose. They guided him away from the car, asked him to place his hands behind his back. He didn't resist. Maybe he knew it was over. Maybe he'd been waiting for this moment longer than anyone realized. Derek finally stood. He didn't approach, didn't insert himself. He just watched as another officer wrapped a light jacket around the girl's shoulders. Even though it was hot, she was shaking. She kept her eyes on the ground, but her breathing had changed. It was deeper now. Less trapped, a female officer arrived a few minutes later, introduced herself softly, and led the girl to a shaded bench near the restrooms, away from the crowd that hadn't really formed. There were only a handful of people around, and most had wisely stayed in their cars. The officer didn't ask a lot of questions right away. She just sat beside her, offered a bottle of water, and said, "You're safe now." Those words seemed to unlock something. The girl's shoulders dropped an inch. She took the water with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you." Back near the sedan, the man was being read his rights. His story unraveled quickly. He claimed he'd given the girl a ride after her bus broke down. Said she'd asked him for help. But when officers checked his phone, they found messages that told a different story. Coded language, payment confirmations, references to deliveries across state lines. And in the trunk, wrapped in a duffel bag, they found a burner phone, zip ties, and a folded map with several rest stops circled in red. Meanwhile, Derek stayed near his truck, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. He wasn't a hero. He hadn't charged in or thrown a punch. He'd just paid attention, noticed the wrong kind of quiet, seen a signal most people would have walked right past. Still, a trooper came over and clapped him on the shoulder. "You probably just saved that kid's life," he said quietly. Derek shook his head. "She saved herself. I just happened to be looking." But the truth was, a lot of people had driven through that rest stop that day. Most hadn't glanced twice at the girl on the bench. Most wouldn't have known what those soda cans meant. But Derek did. And because of that, help came before it was too late. Later, as the girl sat in the back of a patrol car, not handcuffed, just resting, eyes closed but not sleeping, she finally spoke again. Not to the officers, not to Derek, but to herself, so softly no one else heard. I remembered the poster. It had been months ago, in health class. A guest speaker from a youth safety group had come in and talked about human trafficking. Not in dramatic terms, but in real ones. How it didn't always happen in dark alleys. How it could start with a friendly offer, a fake ride, a promise of help. And how, if you ever found yourself trapped with no way to call for help, you could send a silent message. 3 objects in a line, 2 stacked beside them, SOS. She'd thought it was just one of those things teachers made you memorize, like fire drills or earthquake protocols. But when the man had pulled into the rest stop and told her to act normal, something in her mind clicked. She'd seen the vending machine, grabbed a few cans under the pretense of being thirsty and arranged them while he was distracted. She hadn't known if anyone would see it. Hadn't even been sure she was doing it right. But she'd tried, and someone had seen. Now as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement, the girl finally looked up. She spotted Derek near his rig talking to an officer. Their eyes met for just a second. She didn't smile, she wasn't ready for that yet, but she gave the tiniest nod. A silent thank you, he nodded back. No words were needed. They both knew what had happened. One person paying attention, one small signal, one choice to act instead of look away. And in that moment, on an ordinary stretch of highway most people would never remember, something extraordinary had taken place. Not because of grand gestures, but because someone noticed the quiet cry hidden in plain sight. The moment the soda cans landed on the picnic table, 3 in a straight line, 2 stacked neatly beside them, it wasn't just a random arrangement. To most people passing by, it would have looked like trash left behind by a careless traveler. But to the man standing near the vending machine, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, it hit like a jolt. He'd seen that pattern before, not in real life, but in a training video years ago, back when he was still in uniform. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, the Morse code for SOS. Out here in the real world, people adapted it. 3 objects. 2 beside them. A silent scream wrapped in everyday clutter. He didn't react right away. Years of discipline kept his face neutral, his steps unhurried as he walked toward the old payphone near the edge of the lot. Most folks wouldn't even know it still worked, but truckers did. He dropped in a quarter, dialed 911 and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Rest stop on I-77, mile marker 112. There's a teenage girl with a man who doesn't seem connected to her. She just made an SOS signal with soda cans. I think she's in trouble. He gave the dispatcher the car's description, the silver sedan with the dented rear fender. The license plate he'd memorized in one glance and described the girl's hoodie, her stiff posture, the way she never looked directly at the man beside her. The dispatcher stayed calm, promised help within minutes, and told him to stay visible but not intervene unless absolutely necessary. Your eyes are our best tool right now, she said. Just keep watching. He hung up and took a slow breath. The air smelled like hot asphalt and stale coffee. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He'd been in worse situations, places where silence meant survival, where one wrong move could cost lives. This wasn't a battlefield, but it felt just as tense. Every second stretched like taffy. Back at the picnic table, the man in the khakis checked his phone again, then glanced toward the highway. He seemed restless now, like he sensed something shifting. The girl sat perfectly still, but her eyes flicked toward the parking lot, just once, and landed on the trucker. There was no panic in her gaze, only a quiet, desperate hope. She knew he'd seen it, and she was waiting to see if he'd do anything about it. He walked back slowly, coffee in hand, like he hadn't a care in the world. Mind if I join you for a sec? He asked, nodding at the empty space on the bench. My rig's overheating. Gotta let it cool down, the man stiffened. We're not staying long, he said, voice clipped. No problem, the trucker replied, sitting down with an easy shrug. Just needed to stretch my legs. Long haul today. He kept his tone light, talking about the heat, the rough patch of road up near Charleston, anything to sound harmless. Inside, he was counting seconds, listening for sirens, watching the man's hands. Were they relaxed? Clenched? Reaching for something? He noticed how the girl's fingers trembled slightly in her lap, how she kept her chin tucked like she was trying to make herself smaller. This wasn't a family trip. This was control, and she knew it. Then the man stood abruptly. Time to go, he said, voice sharp. The girl rose slowly, but as she passed the table, she nudged one of the cans with her elbow, just enough to break the pattern. It was subtle but deliberate, like she was saying, I saw you. I trusted you to see me too. That's when the first siren cut through the afternoon haze, not loud but steady. Blue lights flashed at the entrance of the rest stop. 2 state troopers stepped out of their cruiser, calm but alert. They didn't rush. They approached with measured steps, giving space, giving time. Afternoon, one said. Mind showing us your license and registration? The man's face went pale. What's this about? He asked, trying to sound annoyed. We're just passing through. Routine check, the trooper replied. Your vehicle matches a description we received. Mind stepping away from the car? The man hesitated, then glanced at the girl. She stood frozen halfway to the passenger door, caught between obedience and the sudden crack of light in her situation. One of the officers walked over to her gently. Hey, he said, crouching slightly. You okay? She didn't answer right away. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Then, so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the highway, she whispered, I don't know him. Those words changed everything. The officers moved quickly but carefully. They guided the man away, asked him to place his hands behind his back. He didn't resist. Maybe he knew the game was up. Maybe he'd been waiting for this moment longer than anyone realized. Meanwhile, a female officer arrived and sat beside the girl on a shaded bench. She didn't bombard her with questions, just offered water, a light jacket. Even though it was hot, the girl was shaking, and said, You're safe now. That simple phrase seemed to unlock something. The girl's shoulders dropped. She took the water with trembling hands and whispered, Thank you. Back near the sedan, the truth began to spill out. The man's story about giving her a ride after her bus broke down fell apart fast. His phone told a different tale, coded messages, payment confirmations, references to deliveries across state lines. In the trunk, wrapped in a duffel bag, they found zip ties, a burner phone, and a map with rest stops circled in red. But the real story wasn't in the evidence. It was in the girl's quiet courage. Later, as she sat in the back of a patrol car, not cuffed, just resting, she finally spoke again, this time to the officer beside her. I saw a poster. In school, she said, about silent signals. If you can't talk, use objects. Make an SOS. She'd remembered it. In the middle of fear, in the middle of being told to act normal, she'd grabbed those cans and arranged them while the man was distracted. She hadn't known if anyone would see it. Hadn't even been sure she was doing it right. But she'd tried, and someone had seen. The trucker stood near his rig, watching it all unfold. A trooper came over and clapped him on the shoulder. "You probably just saved that kid's life," he said. He shook his head. "She saved herself. I just happened to be looking." But the truth was, dozens of cars had passed through that rest stop that day. Most drivers hadn't glanced twice at the girl on the bench. Most wouldn't have known what those soda cans meant. But he did. And because of that, help came before it was too late. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement, the girl looked up and spotted him. Their eyes met for just a second. She didn't smile, she wasn't ready for that yet, but she gave the tiniest nod. A silent thank you. He nodded back. No words were needed. They both knew what had happened. One person paying attention, one small signal, one choice to act instead of look away. And in that ordinary rest stop, on a stretch of highway, most people forget the moment they leave it. Something extraordinary had taken place. Not because of grand heroics, but because someone noticed the quiet cry hidden in plain sight. Weeks passed, and the sharp edges of that afternoon at the rest stop began to soften. Not because it was forgotten, but because life, stubborn and persistent, kept moving forward. The girl was home now, sleeping in her own bed, surrounded by family who checked on her not out of suspicion, but out of love. She still startled at sudden noises, still hesitated before getting into a car. But she was breathing easier, and that for now was enough. Therapy helped. Not in the way movies show, no sudden breakthroughs or tearful confessions, but in small, steady steps. Her counselor didn't push for details right away. Instead, they talked about safety, about control, about how her body had done exactly what it needed to do to survive. Stay quiet, stay still, stay alert. "You weren't weak," the counselor told her once. "You were strategic. That's strength." She held on to that. At school, things were different, some kids whispered. Others avoided her not out of cruelty, but because they didn't know what to say. But a few friends stayed close, sat with her at lunch, walked her to class, never asked for the full story unless she offered it. And slowly she began to trust again. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough. What surprised her most was how much she wanted to talk, not about the fear, but about the lesson. She started writing in a notebook, thoughts about how easy it is to miss someone in trouble if you're not really looking, about how silence isn't always consent, it can be survival, and about that poster in health class, the one that felt like just another school rule, but ended up being a lifeline. One afternoon, she asked her counselor if she could speak to younger students about safety, not in a scary way, but in a practical one. "I don't want them to be afraid," she explained. "I just want them to know they have options even when they feel trapped." The school agreed. And so on a crisp fall morning, she stood in front of a group of ninth graders, hands clasped, voice quiet but clear. She didn't share every detail. She didn't need to. Instead, she showed them how to make an SOS with pens on a desk, with books on a shelf, with shoes by a locker. "If you can't speak," she said, "your hands still can." Afterward, a girl raised her hand and asked, "Did you really think someone would see it?" She paused. "I didn't know, but I had to try." That simple honesty stayed with the students longer than any lecture ever could. Meanwhile, the man who'd taken her faced consequences far beyond a jail cell. Federal agents had traced his messages to a small network operating across 3 states. His arrest opened doors, digital trails, phone records, hidden accounts that led to others like him. It wasn't a massive bust, but it was real. And it started because one girl arranged 5 soda cans on a picnic table. The trucker, for his part, kept driving. He didn't seek attention. When a local news station called asking for an interview, he politely declined. "I just did what anyone would do," he told them. But privately, he knew that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Most would have walked right past. He didn't say it out of pride, just truth. Still, his actions didn't go unnoticed. The state police sent him a letter of commendation. His trucking company gave him a safety award and shared his story, with his permission, in their monthly newsletter, not to glorify him, but to remind other drivers, your eyes matter. Your attention matters. He started paying even closer attention on the road, not in a paranoid way, but with a quiet awareness. He'd wave to kids at bus stops, nod to solo travelers at gas stations, make small talk with cashiers, not to intrude but to signal, "I see you. You're not alone." One evening, during a routine stop in Kentucky, he saw a young woman sitting alone on a bench flanked by two men who kept glancing around like they didn't want to be seen. She wasn't making an SOS. But her posture, the way she hugged her arms, the way her eyes stayed fixed on the ground, reminded him of that day in West Virginia. He didn't confront anyone. Instead, he walked into the convenience store, bought a snack, and casually mentioned to the clerk that those folks outside seem a little tense, might be worth keeping an eye on. The clerk, trained in human trafficking awareness thanks to new industry guidelines, called it in. Nothing dramatic happened that time. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe it wasn't. And that was enough. Back home, the girl began volunteering with a youth safety nonprofit. She helped design new classroom materials, posters, videos, role-playing scenarios that taught kids how to recognize manipulation, how to create distance, how to signal for help without drawing attention. She insisted the tone be calm, not frightening. "Fear shuts people down," she told the team. "Knowledge gives them tools." Her story, shared only in broad strokes, became part of a larger conversation. Teachers reported more students practicing silent signals during drills. Parents asked for resources. Even bus drivers and gas station attendants started receiving basic training on what to watch for. None of it erased what happened, but it turned pain into purpose. One afternoon, months later, she received a plain envelope in the mail. No return address, just her name handwritten on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small patch, a Marine Corps emblem with the words Semper Fi stitched beneath it. The note read, "You showed more courage that day than most ever will. Keep speaking. The world needs your voice." She didn't know if it was from him, the trucker, but she liked to think it was. She pinned the patch to the bulletin board above her desk, right next to the first SOS she'd drawn in her journal. Healing wasn't linear. Some days were harder than others, but she was learning to carry her story not as a wound, but as a warning and a light. And out on the highways, in rest stops and truck stops and quiet corners of America, more people were learning to look, not just with their eyes but with their hearts. Because sometimes the loudest cry for help is the one that makes no sound at all. A year after that sweltering afternoon at the rest stop, the girl stood at the front of a high school auditorium, not as a victim, but as a voice. She wasn't there to recount every detail of what happened. She'd long decided that part of her story belonged to her alone. But to talk about something quieter, something more useful, how to stay safe when the world feels unpredictable. She wore a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, and though her hands trembled slightly at first, her voice stayed steady. She spoke about trust, how real trust feels calm, not forced. About boundaries, how saying no doesn't make you rude, it makes you human. And about signals, how sometimes when words aren't safe, your hands can speak for you. Afterward, students lingered, not out of pity but curiosity. A boy asked how he could help a friend who seemed off but wouldn't talk. A girl wanted to know if it was okay to leave a ride if something felt wrong, even if it meant being rude. The girl answered each question with honesty, not authority. "You don't need proof to trust your gut," she said. "You just need to listen to it." That talk became the first of many. She didn't call herself an activist or a speaker. She just showed up, sometimes in person, sometimes over video, and shared what she wished someone had told her before that day at the bus station. Schools, community centers, even a few trucking conferences invited her to speak, not because her story was dramatic, but because it was real, and because it reminded people that danger doesn't always look like a shadowy figure in an alley. It can wear a polo shirt, smile politely, and offer a ride that seems helpful at first glance. Meanwhile, the man who'd taken her was serving a federal sentence. His case had helped unravel a small but active network that preyed on young people in transit hubs, bus stations, train depots, even rideshare pickup zones. Investigators said his arrest had led to the rescue of 2 other teens before they could be moved across state lines. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was moving. The trucker, for his part, kept driving. He never sought recognition, but his quiet act of attention had sparked something bigger than he ever expected. Trucking companies across the region began including human trafficking awareness in their onboarding. Not as a box to check, but as part of their code of the road. If you see something, say something. Your cab is a front row seat to the country. Use it wisely. Rest stops along major interstates now featured small, clear signs near picnic areas. Need help but can't speak? Arrange 3 objects in a line, 2 beside them. SOS. He noticed the signs himself on his routes. Sometimes he'd pause just for a second and feel a quiet pride. Not for himself, but for the fact that someone had listened. That change was possible. One spring morning, he pulled into a rest area in Tennessee. As he stretched his legs, he saw a teenager sitting alone on a bench, fiddling with a row of snack wrappers. 3 in a line, 2 stacked beside them. His breath caught. He didn't assume the worst, but he didn't ignore it either. He walked to the nearest payphone, still there, still working, called the number posted on the new safety sign, and reported what he saw. Within minutes, a staff member from the nearby visitor center approached the teen gently, offering water and a quiet place to talk. It turned out the young person was dealing with a family crisis, not trafficking, but they were in distress and they needed help. And because someone had learned to look, they got it. That was the real legacy of that day in West Virginia. Not just one rescue, but a shift in awareness. A culture where silence isn't mistaken for consent, where stillness isn't ignored as shyness, where ordinary people feel empowered to act, not as heroes, but as neighbors. Back home, the girl had started a small online project, a series of short videos showing how to create silent distress signals in everyday situations, with books on a desk, shoes by a door, even emojis in a text. She kept the tone calm, practical, never fear-based. This isn't about living scared, she'd say. It's about knowing you always have a way to reach out, even when you can't speak. Her family watched her heal in quiet ways, laughing more at dinner, volunteering at the local library, taking long walks just because she wanted to. She still had hard days. Days when a certain smell or a tone of voice sent her back to that car. But now she had tools, and people, and purpose. The trucker and the girl never became close friends. They didn't need to, but they stayed connected in a quiet way, through letters, through mutual updates from the advocacy group they both quietly supported. Once she sent him a photo of a classroom poster she'd helped design. It showed a row of pencils on a desk, 3 in a line, 2 beside them. Beneath it, in simple letters, "If you can't talk, your hands can." He kept that photo in his glove compartment, right next to his logbook. Years from now, people might forget the details of that rest stop encounter, but the ripples would remain, in the way a cashier notices a teen flinching at a man's touch and calls a manager, in the way a bus driver waits an extra minute when a passenger seems uneasy, in the way a student arranges their lunch tray just so, and a teacher understands without a word, because real change rarely comes from grand gestures. It comes from small acts of attention, from someone choosing to look when it's easier to look away, from a signal made of soda cans, and the person who knew what it meant. And in a world that often feels too loud, too fast, too indifferent, that kind of quiet courage matters more than ever.